Hey, I'm John Cannell, and today on Preppy Kitchen we're making a deliciously decadent ding-dong cake. So let's get started. First off, set your oven to 350 so it's nice and hot. The batter for this cake is a simple stir-together recipe that comes together very quickly. Now, in a large bowl, we're gonna add the dry ingredients, starting with 1 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour. That's 210 grams. I also want 1 3/4 cups of granulated sugar. That's 350 grams. For some contrast, I'm adding half a teaspoon of salt. The salt will really let you taste the cake. If you don't have it in there, it'll be a flat, dull flavor. This is a decadent chocolate cake, so we need 3/4 cup or 75 grams of cocoa powder. By the way, this cake is called a ding dong cake. It is a chocolate layer cake, so rich, fudgy, and melt in your mouth, with the most amazing cream filling and a thin, silky ganache on the outside. It's a million times better than the little packaged thing you could buy at the grocery store or gas station. But it has an inspiration. To puff things up, I want 1 teaspoon of baking soda and 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. My scale is done. Pop that aside. I'm gonna grab a whisk and mix it up. Just whisk, whisk, whisk. You might see some lumps of cocoa powder, and that's not really a big deal this time because we're gonna use some hot liquid in here. All mixed up, let's set that aside and get our wet ingredients together. Now, in a separate bowl, I'm gonna add the wet ingredients, starting with 2 large room temperature eggs. We always use room temperature eggs because they mix a bit better. And honestly, even on recipes where they don't tell you, for milk and cream and things like that, it's always a good idea to have room temperature liquids. It's not necessary, but it's a helping tip if you ever have problems with domed cakes. Whisk those eggs just to break them up. Now I'm adding 1 cup or 240 mils of room temperature buttermilk. The buttermilk is slightly acidic, and when you add a weak acid into a cake, it's gonna give you a tender crumb. In addition, the buttermilk and the cocoa powder are gonna be slightly acidic and react with the baking powder we used. To make things extra soft, half a cup of veggie oil. This cake is gonna be refrigerated, and if you used butter, it would be really hard out of the fridge. It does not taste as good. You want an oil-based cake if it's ever gonna be refrigerated. Now we're gonna add 2 teaspoons of vanilla for some lovely flavor. The wet will be poured into the dry right now. Just stir as you pour. Such an easy recipe, by the way. Stir this together until it's well combined. And by the way, if you like my videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's 2 new recipes every single week and always something delicious on the horizon. Now, this looks like a mess. But that's okay because I have 3/4 cup of hot coffee, which will fix everything. The hot coffee is used because it'll work with the cocoa powder and really bring out the flavor. If you do not want to use coffee because there's kids or you don't have caffeine or you just are anti-coffee, go ahead and use hot water instead. It'll be fine. You'll just have a little bit less flavor. All right, let's pour and whisk. Just get that all in here. So now we're gonna whisk this until it's well combined, and it's gonna be going from gloopy to very liquidy, but that's just as it should be. Do not panic. I hope I'm not tempting fate by saying that. There we go. Just a little bit of mixing, and I have a nice, loose, slack batter. We're gonna transfer this into 2 8-inch rounds. Let's prep them up really quick. I love the smell of baking spray in the morning. So 8-inch rounds just need a little bit on the side, the bottom almost nothing, because for a best practice, you should be using parchment rounds. If you've ever had a cake get stuck, so frustrating, so sad. A parchment round fixes that. It will never get stuck, it'll always come out, even if you waited way too long for the cake to come out. I'm gonna distribute my batter now, and just try and eyeball it. If you want to be certain they're exactly the same, use a scale to get the correct, perfect distribution. What's in the jug, you wonder? Well, for a really nice cake to be assembled, the best is to have flat, beautiful layers. If it's domed, you could trim the domes, but that's wasting cake, and honestly, cake is doming because the edge bakes really fast, the center bakes last, and what happens is the edge gets locked into place like 20 minutes into the bake, and for the other 10 minutes, that center is expanding upwards. So you don't want to have that, because by the time the center is done, the edge is a bit overdone and it's harder and crunchier and just not as nice. We're gonna use cake strips today. These are just fabric strips that are wet. You want to have them damp and not sopping wet. My cake layers are ready to pop into the oven for 28 to 30 minutes at 350 or until a skewer inserted in the center comes out clean. In you go. While our cakes are baking, we're gonna make the beginnings of the filling. This filling is a milky custard with butter added to it. It's like a cross between a buttercream and a custard, and it's totally delicious. In a medium saucepan, we're gonna add 1 cup or 200 grams of granulated sugar. To thicken things up, we're using all-purpose flour, 1/3 cup or 40 grams. Sprinkle, sprinkle. Our scale is done. Whisk this up to combine the flour and sugar. Actually, I don't like this whisk. I like you, but whenever I make something with milk thickening up, I want a narrow whisk. This is okay, but it can't get to the corners of the pot. Like if this is the pot and this is the whisk, see all that section right here? Not mixed, it's gonna burn. So if you have a narrow whisk, it'll be easier. This can hit the corner. Now it's time to add 1 cup or 240 mils of milk right in, just drizzle as you whisk. This helps prevent lumps. Lumps and bumps. Mix, mix, mix. Choo, choo, choo. Now we're gonna take this onto our cooktop and place it over medium heat. And yes, you will be whisking. My milk mixture is over medium heat right now. We're gonna whisk frequently until it comes to a simmer. So just keep an eye on it. Simmering means it's warmed up. You'll see little tiny bubbles on the edge and it's steaming up with the fingers like this, just like that. This will depend on your cooktop, but it'll be between 6 to 8 minutes for the stuff. This has just come to a simmer. Come take a look. You can see the edge is thickening up. Reduce heat to medium-low. Once it's thickened up, just cook for 2 minutes while stirring constantly with your whisk. And this will help the flour get cooked through and it'll thicken to the appropriate viscosity. This is screaming hot and that is not acceptable for decorating a cake. So we're gonna transfer this to a heat-proof bowl to let it cool down. You don't let things cool down in the pot because the pot is so hot and retains so much heat that you'd be waiting a very long time. This needs to cool down, but we don't want a skin to develop, so grab some paper or plastic and just cover the surface completely. I'm gonna leave this on the counter for 2 hours to cool to room temperature. If you wanna do this more quickly, go ahead and pop it into the fridge, but just make sure you don't leave it there for too long. It should only be room temperature, not ice cold. We'll be back with the magic of editing. Once your milk mixture is cooled down, we're gonna grab 1 cup or 226 grams of unsalted room temperature butter. It's nice and soft. And we're gonna pop this into our mixer and beat it up for 2 minutes on medium speed. Okay, get this nice and creamed up. Always a good idea to scrape the bowl down. I don't know if you know this, but this little screw head right here adjusts the height of your mixer. Right, everybody? This butter is creamy, amazing, and softened. So now we're gonna add our cooled milk mixture 2 to 3 tablespoons at a time, but first, get that paper off. We didn't want a skin to form, but you don't wanna waste all this good stuff either. Plop that mixture down. I'm gonna set it to medium-low and pour in a measured amount, so 2 to 3 tablespoons. Let that mix and incorporate. You can scrape the bowl down if needed, and then we're gonna add the rest in batches. That's mixed in. Time for the next batch. Scrape the bowl down. Can we just take a moment and discuss how much better this would be than an actual ding dong? All these childhood favorites that I have such good memories of, when I taste them as an adult, I'm like, oh, what's happening? This doesn't taste good at all. It's just because you've gotten used to like better ingredients. So you're using nicer chocolate, fresher cake, and you know, that childlike sense of wonder is diminished a bit. This is worth it. All right, next batch goes in. Last batch goes in. This looks so good. One last scrape down of the mixing bowl and this as well. There's like at least a tablespoon left inside. My mother grew up in Mexico, and the idea of wasting food is not acceptable, including what's left in the bowl. One more mix. And because all of my milk mixture is in, I'm gonna add a teaspoon of vanilla now. And it's time to increase our mixer to medium and let this run for about a minute or two, or until it is nicely mixed, silky, smooth, and quite appetizing. So keep an eye on it. All done. Take a look at the consistency. Light, full of air, and so creamy. If you want it to be bright white, like an actual ding dong, go ahead and add a tiny, like quarter drop of purple food coloring, and that'll just brighten it up. Very optional. I'm just telling you because if you look online, a lot of the ding dong cakes have that white filling, and it's because a drop of purple has been added. And mix it in. There we go, and much wider now. Let's grab our cake layers and get to assembly. All right, grab that first layer, and of course I have a nice cake stand out. You could use a big plate if you want. You can see totally flat, no doming. It's really glossy on top, so I'm gonna place the glossy side down and have the bottom up so that it absorbs the cream a little bit better and no sliding will happen. Let's get all of that delicious filling. You can use an offset spatula and just smooth it out into an even-ish layer. It does not have to be perfect. Now grab your second layer, and I'll point out these layers are completely cool. If they're warm at all, this filling will melt and you will be frustrated and sad. So don't try and accelerate that. My filling is almost towards the edge. If yours is more in the center, just go ahead and shimmy and gently press to coax it towards the edge. And now I just want a nice even layer all around, so grab an offset spatula and we're just gonna smooth it out. If you see any gaps, just try and fill them in so the ganache that we're gonna use later has a nice smooth coating. And now this can go into the fridge to set up while we make our ganache. By the way, that cake can be in the fridge for up to 2 days covered before you put the ganache on, so you can make it ahead of time if you're having people over. Now, grab 8 ounces or 226 grams of bittersweet chocolate, and we're gonna give this a good chop. You want smaller pieces so they melt really easily. You'll notice I'm using chocolate bars for this, and that's just because a chocolate bar will melt much more easily than chocolate chips. You could use chocolate chips if you need, but it's gonna be a little bit trickier to melt, and the ganache is gonna be just a little bit less nice. You might not be able to tell though. Just hunt and peck around for any larger pieces that you missed, and now this can get transferred into a medium bowl. This ganache is gonna be picture perfect once we add 3/4 of a cup or 90 mils of steaming hot heavy cream. Microwave this for 90 seconds until it's steaming hot. Pour the cream right onto the chocolate and let it stand for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, we're gonna give this a stir, and it should be really nice and melty. Just stir it until it's all combined, silky smooth. If there are some pieces that are not melted, give it a few more seconds in the microwave, maybe like 10-second bursts. This looks lovely. We're gonna set this aside for a few minutes until it's thickened up so that we can coat the cake in a thin layer. If the ganache is too hot, it'll just run down the sides. You'll be frustrated. And the time really depends on the ambient temperature and your countertop, so it's kind of a take a look and see situation. But you can plan for about 15 minutes. My cake is chilled. The ganache is a nice consistency. You can see it's spreadable, but it's not very thin. The cake is cool, so it's gonna chill the ganache further when it goes on. Okay, start off by either dolloping or adding most of the ganache on top. Now use a small offset spatula to spread it all out to the edges. You want it dripping off gracefully. This isn't a drip cake, we'll be spreading it all the way out, but you don't want it just falling onto the cake plate. Now we can begin smoothing it out on the side. Don't worry if it looks a little messy at first, you can clear that up. Give it one final smooth. Use a damp paper towel just to clean the edge of your cake plate off. Now it's time to pop your cake back into the fridge until the ganache sets completely. Once set, slice your cake and it's ready to enjoy. That is actually wild. It is so fudgy and decadent, but that ermine frosting in the middle is light, fluffy, and it's just perfect. I hope you get a chance to make this decadent chocolate recipe, and if you like my videos, hit that subscribe button and check out my chocolate playlist.